Anthony Rowley, Singapore Business Times. Minister, I'd like to ask you a question. It draws on your experience as Justice Minister, also formerly as Finance Minister. Abenomics is going to require some very fundamental changes in Japan, including legal changes. And some experts I have spoken to suggest that this may take at least 5 years. Do you agree with that timescale, that these reforms will indeed take a long time? And in the meantime, do you think that further fiscal and possibly monetary stimulus will be necessary for the Japanese economy?
これまで法務大臣だけではなく財務大臣としてご活躍されてきたわけでございますが、いろんな法改正などが行われているのでございますが、本当に日本のシステムが変わるのには5年ぐらいかかるのではないかというふうにも指摘されているわけでございます。このような今までの法改正などで十分だと思いますでしょうか。それともさらに日本経済の活性化を実現するためにはより刺激的な財政的な措置というのも必要だと思われますでしょうか。
アベノミクスの主ななんていうんでしょうか項目といいますかね、主な論点は大体出てきたのではあるいは出てきつつあるのではないかと思っております。その効果が出ていくためにはしばらくまだ時間はかかるだろうと思います。しかし今のところは相当順調に来ておりますが、むしろ順調すぎるぐらいに順調に来ましてですね、これはまたアメリカでイエレンさんがどういうふうにこれからやっていかれるのかとかいろんな問題がございますが、今のところ非常に順調に来ておりますが、思い切った手法を安倍さんがお取りになってきただけにですね、いろんなことには相当目配りをしていかなければいけないという感じ。私法務大臣で今経済財政政策の細かな点はよく分かりませんが、そういう目で今見ております。
Assume you're talking about Abenomics, and certainly I believe that in regard to the main topics or contents of Abenomics, almost all of the main ideas have been presented, and I believe that their effects, of course it will take some time for the effects to be fully realized or to fully appear, but I think overall we can say that the positive effects of Abenomics are moving steadily forward. In fact, sometimes people are saying that they're moving too steadily forward. In regard to what will happen in the future, this is not just something that is dependent on what happens in Japan. For example, what will the head of the FRB in the US, Ms. Yellen, do? That is also going to affect us. However, right now I am in charge of the Ministry of Justice, and I am not therefore a main member of fiscal and management policy. However, what I can say is that because some of the steps that Mr. Abe has taken have been so very large and so very all-encompassing, that we do have to also take care of some of the effects that his policies have taken in various areas. In other words, we have to make sure that everyone is being satisfied. So.
中国から総理日本特派員のプレス。確か移民は日本にとってはすごく重要で大事で、ただ一つ私が疑問を持っているのは、移民政策をやろうとしてもまだヘイトスピーチみたいなことがいっぱいありますので、その辺の法的な取り締まりはどういうふうに思いますか。またもう一つは投資に関しても外国からもやっぱり中国が一番重要な投資家にもなるかもしれませんので、ただ今の反中的な雰囲気はどのようにそれをいい方に持っていくか疑問を持ってます。それに関する答えをお願いします。
So before I have two questions, certainly immigration policy is very important for Japan. However, in spite of the fact that you are saying we want to welcome more foreigners to Japan, we do have this very negative thing occurring in Japan, which are the appearance of these hate speeches. In regard to hate speeches, do you intend to take some kind of legal action in this regard? Secondly, in regard to the importance of investment, especially from abroad, in the near future, it could be that China could be one of the most important foreign investing countries in the Japanese economy. When we consider the fact that relations with China are strained, what do you think could be done in this area?
ヘイトスピーチに関しましてはですね、私は大変これは恥ずかしいことだと思っております。日本人は もっとおおらかな自信を持たなければいけない、ああいうヘイトスピーチというようなものはですね、自身に対するそのおおらかな自信を持つということができなくなっている、私は大変残念なことだと思っております。でこれに関しましてはもちろんいろいろな啓発活動をしていくということは大事でございます。こういうことは許されることではない、政府もあるいは閣僚として政治家としてもですね、あらゆる機会を捉えて発言をしていく必要があるかと思います。それから法的な措置につきましては、ご承知のように私京都出身ですが、京都におけるこの活動につきましてですね、裁判所は第1審第2審ともにそのヘイトスピーチ活動の違法性を認めた判決を出しました。しかしですね、その取り締まり法規ということになりますと、場合によると言論の自由、表現の自由ということとの関係がないわけではありません。ないわけではありませんので、それをどういう立法にしていくかというのは相当注意を払わなければいけないと思います。いけないと思いますが、最高裁判所が裁判所の判断がようなことを認めるというのは、法務大臣は判決が適切かどうかということは論評しないことになっておりますが、ああいう判決を出されているということを十分に考慮していろんな対策を考える必要があると思います。それから確かに今中国との関係はですね、かなりなんていうんでしょうか、なかなか難しいことが多くなってきております。それでやはり我々はですね、中国とこの隣国でありまして、簡単に移動してしまうというわけにはこれはもうできないわけでございます。それで私はこれは今の難しさの根本にございますのはですね、やはり中国は急速に経済力をつけですね、成長してきております。そうしますと、そういう時はですね、これは過去の歴史を見ましてもその力に見合ったやはり秩序の見直しを求めていくということがしばしばあるわけでございまして、秩序の見直しを求める方、あるいは秩序の見直しを求められる方、双方にこの慎重な配慮が必要であろうと私は考えております。日本もですね、1945年に戦争に負けましてから高度経済成長を遂げた時はですね、日本自身としてはかなり抑制しながら、そういう日本の地位の向上に対して向上の踏まえて日本の地位の改善を主張してまいりましたが、かなり全体的には抑制的にやってきたつもりでおります。そういう中でどういうふうに中国がそういう関係自分の今の大きな力ですね、成長に向けて、秩序の見直しを主張されるのか、それを我々はどう受け止めるのか、お互いによく双方の考えを踏まえながら理解を深めていくことが私は何よりも大事だとこう考えております。
First of all, in regard to the appearance of hate speeches in Japan, as a Japanese person, I might feel very ashamed that such things occur. I believe that Japanese people who participate in hate speeches are simply displaying to the world the fact that they lack self-confidence, they lack confidence in themselves, and because they lack this self-confidence, they don't have the ability to be kinder and more accepting of others. I think it is a very, very unfortunate thing indeed, and I believe that certainly enlightenment PR activities to allow people to understand that this kind of activity is unacceptable should be promoted. That should be done by the government, by cabinet members, by politicians. Every opportunity where they can speak out and say that this kind of thing is unacceptable, they should certainly speak out. In regard to what kind of legal matter or legal actions can be taken, as you may know, I come from Kyoto, that's my electoral district, and in Kyoto there was a court case that on the first district level and the high court level, both the verdicts said that hate speeches were unacceptable. So in regard to what kind of crackdown perhaps we could do in terms of these hate speeches, this is a very, very difficult issue because on the one hand, hate speeches should not be permitted, but on the other hand, by cracking down on them, you run into the problem that you might infringe upon the people's right to freedom of speech. freedom of expression. In other words, what kind of legislation can be drafted that can somehow prevent these kinds of hate speeches, but still not infringe upon people's fundamental rights to speak out and express their opinions. Having said this, however, since there already was a court decision made about hate speeches, as a Minister of Justice, it is not, I am supposed to never comment upon my personal views about court verdicts. However, since we do have a very distinct verdict that was issued by the courts, I believe that we can use this as a foundation to move forward in regard to future legislation. In regard to our relationship with China, as you've pointed out, of course, relations between the two countries are very unpleasant, not good at present. But this is something that we must work out. After all, we are neighbors, and neither country can simply pick up and move to a different geographical location. When we look at what is happening with China, it is understandable that they are changing as a nation. It is because they are suddenly becoming a very strong economic power, and history shows us that when a country develops economic might, they want to stand up and become confident and change their position or standing in the world order. However, although it is natural for a rising country to demand a change in their position in the world order, with the people demanding a change and the people being asked to receive that change, both sides must be calm and careful and consider all possible ramifications. What I mean by this is that when we look back at our own Japanese history, in 1945, Japan lost the war, and after that it began to develop as an economic power. Even within Japan, as Japan developed more economic might, there were voices raised that we should work harder to raise our standing or position in the international community. However, I believe that even though there were such aggressive voices raised, I think the overall conclusion in Japan was that such voices should be held down as much as possible. In other words, there should be self-restraint on the part of the Japanese nation. So this was what happened with Japan. What China will do in the future, we must all work very carefully to see what will happen. But I also believe that shared understanding of each other's positions and desires and hopes is very, very important.
Richard Lloyd Parry of the Times. Minister, among your duties you have the very weighty responsibility of signing or choosing not to sign execution orders for condemned death row prisoners. And that's a duty which very few people in the world ever have to face, that of coolly deciding whether somebody is going to live or die. And I wondered if you could tell us, as a sensitive and thoughtful person, how that feels to be faced with that decision and what goes through your mind as you make that decision. And related to that, I think it's true that in the long term, over the past few decades, the trend internationally has been towards abolition of the death penalty, certainly among advanced economies. It's really only Japan and the United States now who continue with the death penalty. I know that it's not likely in the near future, but in the long term, looking to the future, do you think Japan will eventually go down the path of abolition?
タイムズでございます。法務大臣の最も難しいお仕事の一つは、その死刑囚、この死刑を執行するかどうかということを決めるということでございます。このようなその責任というのは誰も担いたくないものではないかと思います。先生を見ますと、大臣を見ますと、非常にそのセンシティブな方でございます。非常に思慮深い方でございます。しかしその決定をしなきゃいけないとき、どういうようなことをお考えになるんでしょうか。人間としてどういうような思いをされるのでしょうか。それについてちょっと触れていただけませんでしょうか。そして関連した質問でございますが、過去数十年間におきましては、ほとんどの先進国は死刑を廃止しているわけでございます。今、先進国の中でそれをまだ続けておりますのは、日本とアメリカぐらいだけではないかと思います。今すぐ日本がその制度を変えるということはないと思うでございますが、長期において、やっぱりいずれ日本も死刑というものを廃止すると思いますでしょうか。
確かに私の仕事の中で一番なんて言うんでしょうか、非常に荷の重い仕事であるということは私も率直に申し上げたいと思います。それから今ご指摘のように いろいろな国が死刑を廃止している。特にEU 等は EU に加盟の条件としても死刑をしないということを条件に挙げておられると思います。そういう世界の中の流れということも私は十分に承知をしております。
Yes, I believe, thank you for pointing this out. As a Minister of Justice, that is probably the heaviest burden that I must bear, the decision whether or not to sign that document. That I will say that very, very frankly. And I'm also very, very aware of the trends that you have pointed out, that in many countries of the world, the death penalty has been abolished. In fact, I think it is one of the requirements of the EU now for a country who wants to join the EU to abolish the death penalty. I'm very aware of these trends.
ただ日本におきましてはですね、もちろん死刑が必要かあるいは必要でないかというにはもう法哲学上の議論を含めてさまざまな議論が今まで行われてきたところでございますが、日本におきましては基本的に国民の支持を得ている、死刑は必要だと考えている国民が多数を占めているのではないかと私は考えております。したがいまして先ほどのお尋ねで日本がいつか死刑を廃止するようになるかということでございますが、これは先のことはなかなか見通せないんですが、私は近い将来に日本が死刑を廃止していく可能性というのはあまり大きくないと思っております。
In Japan, there of course have been many discussions and debates about the necessity or the non-necessity of having the death penalty. Legal, philosophical debates have raged about this matter. However, to the best of my understanding, in Japan, it seems that the death penalty today still receives support. In other words, the majority of Japanese people believe that there is a need for the death penalty. In answer to your question, will the death penalty eventually be abolished in Japan? What I can say is that it's very, very difficult to predict the future. However, at least in the short term, I do not see the death penalty being abolished in Japan.
それで個別の死刑執行について申し上げることはなんていうんでしょうか、死刑、当該の死刑囚あるいはそのご家族、それからあまり具体的に申し上げるということは今現に死刑囚として刑務所におられる方々に非常に心理に影響を与えますので、私は極めて寡黙に今まで対応してまいりました。
And if in regard to more specific discussions, specific examples, etc., I have until now maintained a very strong silence about these matters, partly in regard to consideration for the people who are actually on death row and their families, and also people who are considering the people that are incarcerated now and are awaiting possible execution. Their mental situation is very, very difficult. So again, I have refrained from speaking out about these matters.
ただ一つ申し上げられるのは私は死刑を執行を命ずるときはそれに関する記録はできるだけ丁寧に読むように心がけておりますが、多くの死刑囚罪は憎むべきであります。しかしそういう極めて残虐な犯罪を犯した人たちの特に子どもの頃を振り返ってみますと、子どもの頃を見てみますと、極めて不幸な生い立ちをした人が多いと。幸せな家庭に育った人がですね、それだけ残虐な犯罪を犯すというようなことはあまりないんだろうと私は思います。そういう不幸な生い立ちをした人が悲惨な凄惨な犯罪を犯しているということをいつも考えざるを得ない、そんなことを思っております。
Well, all I can say is that every time I do sign the order and make a decision to approve an execution being implemented, I take great care to read all of the related documents so that I completely fully understand the situation. And although I cannot speak about individual cases, I can say that in a majority of these cases, the feeling that I have is that one can not forgive or one can attack and feel great anger about the crime that has been committed. However, in regard to the person that actually perpetrated the crime, that actually committed a heinous offense, a very, very cruel act, when one looks at the childhoods, the past histories of these people, most of them came from a very, very unhappy childhood. There are almost no cases where a person was raised in a happy family, a loving family, and eventually committed a terrible, cruel crime. Again, this trend of people having a very, very unhappy suffering childhoods leading to these tragic cases, that is something that always remains in my heart.
Martin, go ahead.
Martin Kölling, the German Financial Daily Handelsblatt. You mentioned immigration, that you are basically fine-tuning the rules for high-qualified immigrants, labor. You mentioned the trainee program, but of course we all know that there's also, Prime Minister Abe also pushes a little bit the discussion of immigration of not so qualified labor, of nurses, but also of maybe of laborers in the construction industry or wherever. And I wonder basically what policies Japanese bureaucracies are known to be very thorough. I assume that your ministry is looking at different policies that might be implemented in the future. I would like to ask you basically what policies are under discussion or under review in your ministry to also open the gates for more immigration in the not so qualified parts of the labor market.
ドイツの金融新聞でございます。その移民政策でございます。特にそのスキルを有しておりますその外国人労働者をもっと日本に来てもらいたい。そしてまたそのインターンプログラムっていうのも分かるんでございます。しかしながらそれと別に安倍首相は例えばそんなにスキルを有してないような人たち、例えば建設業で働くような人たち、あるいは介護士とか、いろんな新しいカテゴリーの人たちも移民として受け入れたいというような話をしているわけでございます。日本の役所というものは必ずその一つのテーマについて徹底的にいろいろ調べていることではないかと思いますでありますので、法務省の中でもいろんな議論が進んでいると思うんでございますので、その結果近い将来にどのようなカテゴリーのその移民というのが将来的に日本に受け入れられるようになると思われますでしょうか。
今の日本の移民政策という言葉が使うの適当かどうか分かりませんが、政策の基本は一つはその先ほど申し上げたような高度人材というような方々にはできるだけ来ていただけるようにしたい、そして、日本に定着をして活躍していただきたいというのは一つでございます。
So I don't know if the correct wording would be immigration policy, but our fundamental approach to this idea is that, as I mentioned earlier, one category that we do want to invite in great numbers to Japan are what we call highly skilled foreign professionals. We want them to teichaku is the word that is being used, which means to settle or reside in Japan and be very active in Japanese society.
それからいわゆる単純労働と言われるものに関しては先ほど申し上げたような技能実習制度の枠内で、そこの乱用があったり、人権侵害があるというようなそしりを受けないようにきちっと本来の目的に照らしてやっていく、技能移転と、国際的な技術移転ということにきちっと絞ってやっていくというのが基本だろうと思います。
In regard to people lacking these high skills, in other words, more simple labor categories of persons, as I mentioned earlier, that we have this technical intern and training program, and this is something that we want to refine and revise and to make stronger. We want to make sure that it is not abused and that human rights violations do not occur as a result of this program. We want to make sure that the original concept behind this training program, which is to transfer technology and skills and knowledge to other countries, is realized.
ただ今日本は若年人口が減っておりますし、もちろんその日本の若年人口の活用ということを十分に考えなければなりませんが、震災復興に必要な労働力、 あるいは2020年の東京オリンピック・パラリンピックに向けて必要な労働力、これがもう足らないという声があちこちにあるのも事実でございます。
And of course, we know that we have not only decreasing numbers of young people in Japan, but even these decreased numbers of young people in Japan, they also need a place to be able to work and to thrive. So we must take care of those young people. But on the other hand, as you suggested, there is a need that we need even more workers in Japan, in particular to help with the reconstruction recovery efforts after the Great East Japan earthquake, and also in preparation for the 2020 Olympics.
従いまして、そういうところの対応というのはどうしていくかということですが、現在考えて実行に移そうとしておりますことは、技能実習を得たものの中からきちっとなんていうんですか、職種を定めまして、そしてきちっとしたところにはもう少しそれの活用の余地を開いていこうということで今やっております。
So how are we going to deal with this problem? One of the things that we are contemplating right now and trying to move toward implementation is to take some of the people who have been part of the technical intern training program. Once they have completed their training and meet certain conditions, we would like to be able to allow them to stay longer in Japan and work in specific jobs that have been assigned to them.
それを超えてどうしていくかというのはまだ議論が十分に煮詰まっておりません。ただ安倍政権の下ではいわゆる特区制度の中で、例えば女性の社会進出に伴う家事労働というものをどうしていくのか等々ですね、あるいは介護等随分今日本には必要になっておりますが、そういうところを特区の中でどういう問題点があるのかというものを少し試してみようといいますか、そういうところに来ております。それを超えて日本全体の雇用政策といいますか労働力政策としてどうしていくかということはまだ実は十分議論が煮詰まっていないというのが実情でございます。
Beyond that, there are many discussions that are being done in different parts of Japan. However, none of the discussions have really come to fruition. They have not reached conclusions yet. We are experimenting with different ideas. For example, Prime Minister Abe has set forth the strategy of creating special economic zones. There are places where different ideas can be experimented with. For example, one of Prime Minister Abe's pillars of his growth strategy is to promote women to become more active in society. But they will, if they're going to be more active in society, they are going to need help with housework, etc. How can we secure enough labor to help them be able to fulfill their jobs? Also, nursing care is a big area where we're going to need more labor. However, what specifically are we going to do about these labor needs? Discussions are still ongoing.
I'm very sorry, but the extension time is more than over, so we have to finish here. As you can see, there are so many more questions. Maybe Minister Tanigaki might come back soon. You're always welcome. And so thank you very much for coming, and it's a pleasure to give you the 1-year membership of the Closed Club. So if you would like to meet all of the people asking questions, always welcome at our bar. Thank you very much, and hope to see you soon again. Many questions left.
ありがとうございました。Thank you very much.
Hi, Carsten.